Thank you, Hunter. In case y'all are unaware of Sydney, truly, when I was researching this weekend, I had to cut down the bio like 4 times. But basically, what you should know is that Sydney is a 2020 graduate of Sheridan College from the Honors of Bachelor of Business Administration and Human Resource program. Sydney completed both their advanced diploma as well as the degree completion. Now, Sydney has written AODA policies, practices, and procedures for nonprofit orgs and made sure that they were compliant and were in the situation where they could better train their employees to work alongside and provide support to clients with disabilities. Now, Sydney has since started speaking and consulting with other companies on how to be more accessible and inclusive from a human approach. And Sydney has also founded, like Hunter said, a company called Accessible Creates to provide high-level solutions regarding accessibility and other areas of DEIB in human resources as other areas of business operations. Now, they have spoken at numerous events, speaking about all sorts of diversity and inclusion topics, from neurodiversity at work to creating an inclusive culture, as well as the importance of intersectionality. Sydney, I am incredibly honored to get to talk to you today. Is there anything else our audience should know about you before we dive into questions?
No, I think you summed it up, considering you said it, like you said, it was a long bio.
It was good though. It's like, there's seriously, you've accomplished so much. It's absolutely wild. All right. So what else should we know about yourself and your background? What brought you to this work?
Yeah, so I am Sydney Elaine Butler, and growing up, I had a speech impediment. I spoke too fast sometimes. Sometimes I still do, even though I'm a speaker, and I couldn't say my R's properly. I was diagnosed with autism at a young age. Again, didn't know what it meant, and all these different barriers that were thrown into me in the school setting. And then I realized when I was in the workplace, there was barriers again towards me. And just when I was also in school studying for my advanced diploma and my degree, I realized there's a lot of barriers in HR and business as a whole for people like me. And so I kind of made my mission. I thought I would go to each company and work as HR and also support accessibility. But as I graduated during 2020, as you mentioned, I realized I could do more as an external consultant, speaker, founder, and really talk about and bring awareness to things that matter the most to me.
Yes, absolutely. I'm fully in support of this. This is also something I discovered after, a couple of years of doing this for Power to Fly, or kind of realized that like I had this platform to be able to speak about these issues or about things that, things that I had seen in the workplace. So I really love this. All right, we talked a little bit about ableism and what it is in general. Is there a way that you prefer to define it, or different types of ableism that people might be able to look out for so they can recognize this when it happens?
Yep, I'll actually pull up a slide that I created to help reinforce this idea, if you don't mind.
There we go.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Wonderful. So what is ableism? So there's physical ableism, which is the first and foremost best known form of ableism, and is induced by a physical inability. There's also mental ableism. A mental disability might be less known cause of disability, as it's not always displayed on our bodies. And so what is ableism exactly? It's a discrimination in favor of able-bodied people. And so on the left side, I have some terms you might hear in the workplace. I thought it was important to include this because, sometimes you hear these terms and you feel in the pit of your stomach, something's wrong, but it's not racist. It's not sexist. What is it? It's ableist. It's ableism. And so these include, that's so lame, you're so retarded, that guy is crazy, you're acting so bipolar, or the weather even, when someone say the weather's bipolar, that's still an ableist term. Are you off your meds? It's like the blind leading the blind. My ideas fell on deaf ears, and she's such a psycho. So as you can see, we have a mix of both physical and mental ableism. And actually, I think in the workplace, mental ableism is even more prevalent because, the definition is not always displayed on your body and not displayed. And I think a lot of people don't understand that mental illness and mental health can be a type of disability. And there's just so much learning that needs to be done there because, even people in the mental health community, or they do have mental illness, don't identify as being disabled, but now we're realizing that it could be. So looking at what that looks like.
As I'm listening to you, anybody that's seen me on more than one chat probably already knows I live with bipolar disorder. But as and as somebody who does identify as neurodivergent, I hate the term, but it's true. I am mentally ill. All of these things. I literally never would have expected ableism to include, people like myself. So I'm loving this discussion we're having. Because yeah, I mean, I do consider it an invisible disability, but I never would have grouped it under the umbrella of ableism. So I very much appreciate this. Okay, would you feel comfortable telling us, or sharing some of the ways that you've experienced this ableism firsthand?
Yeah, so first off, I've experienced internalized ableism. So growing up, I have CPTSD, I have autism, all these different things, but I didn't know exactly what that meant. And growing up, I would have these aches and pains, and I also have fibromyalgia. I have these aches and pains, and I was like, oh, I'm just being dramatic. I'm just, or when I would go through a serious event, or I just went through something traumatic, I would literally lie in my bed for the next couple of days, felt the executive dysfunction, but I was beating myself up. And I was like, what is wrong with me? I can just get over it, Like nothing's wrong. But, realizing the impact it has on the body and how it impacts your everyday life. And in case of ableism in the workplace, so again, you can't tell by looking at me that I have a disability. And so, or disabilities rather. And so some people were like, oh, for example, I worked in a recreational setting and we had to do changes. I work with kids, teens, and adults, and I had to also help them with changes sometimes. And so it would be a 2-person job, but some days my leg would flare up and I couldn't be able to lift as good as I could the week before, for example. And people are like, oh, you're just being lazy, oh, you just don't want to do it, you're just making excuses. And it's like, you can't see the physical pain on my leg. I feel it, but you can't, you don't know what it's like. And so, people were just calling me lazy. And that's a form of ableism.
I never even thought about like kind of the self-internalized stuff. I mean, I am absolutely guilty of doing this for, most of my life until I realized and got a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Like lazy was that was my mantra. Like, I wish I wasn't this way, but I'm just kind of lazy. And so this is what I have to work around. And it's been wild how long it's taken me to try and unpack that and stop that brand of thinking. So I can imagine how much more difficult this must be when you're trying to like make these things clear for someone who is not personally and immediately impacted by these these issues or these abilities, these conditions. All right, do you think that ableism is more frequently ignored compared to other isms like sexism or racism, and if you do, why do you think that is?
I think a lot of people don't understand what it actually is. So like, again, the terms I just mentioned, you can feel in your gut that something's wrong, but they don't know how to label it. And because we don't talk about it, we just don't. And so I'm like, my workshops I do, my consulting, I'm trying to now talk to companies about ableism. What does it actually look like in the workplace? And I now doing this workshop and this session for you today, but just bringing awareness, because I think there's a lack of awareness we don't understand. And even I think because also the internalized ableism is so deep that sometimes us ourselves don't know what we're looking for. We don't know that it's like, oh, that's actually ableism. There's such lack of understanding around what it actually is and how it impacts our day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. We're getting some really great comments in the chat, so I wanted to give a chance to highlight these here. Julia Morin had said people throw PTSD around casually far too frequently. Something about that gave me PTSD, or about something trivial, similar to how people say I'm so OCD casually.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I've been guilty of it before I was diagnosed. I absolutely had called someone bipolar, or, in regards to just some behavior, some random, completely reasonable behavior that I apparently took issue with at the time. So, this is something that even if you're within the community, you can absolutely still be doing and causing harm.
I catch myself, like, I think I'm not, like, I'm still learning. It's like,
oh yeah.
Was
well,
that,
and replacing it, right? Like,
yeah.
Somebody chimed in saying that they substitute wild for stuff like that. I have gone to bonkers because it's a term that nobody uses anymore. And
Yeah, I've been using wild a lot too.
Yeah. But that's the thing is, like, you're not actually, a lot of the times with this language, I don't think a lot of us understand how the language is perceived because we don't put a ton of thought into it, but it's so ingrained. I mean, people still said the R word when I was like through high school. And I remember like being kind of taking a stand on it and being like, I don't think that's right. We shouldn't say it. And like getting laughed at because it was like, who cares? Like, it's fine, blah, blah, blah. Same with lame. I feel like nobody really, like, the terminology has been watered down so much because of misuse like this. Okay, let's pull back a little bit. And I do want to highlight, y'all, if you have questions for Sydney, please feel free to send them in. I'm checking out the chat this whole time. So if you have questions, make sure you send them in before time runs out today. Let's see where else. We've got some people talking about how they didn't realize that PTSD was something you could get even if you weren't in the military, because I feel like at least in America and maybe just North America, that was how how it was discussed or how it was presented in a lot of ways.
I always make this joke because I had abuse and trauma from the hands of an army man, and so it's like the army man didn't get the PTSD. I got the PTSD from him because of how he acted because of the army.
Oh my gosh, you're not kidding. It's absolutely wild. Let's see. Another person was talking about how that internalized ableism is very, very hard to unpack. All right, we did have a question from Ashley. So this one kind of dovetails with what we're going to talk about next. I want to talk about some of the ways that we can address ableism, both like within the workplace and the world at large. Ashley's specific question was, how do you effectively combat ableism towards someone who is unwilling to listen or take it seriously? Ashley, I see you. I have had this conversation with numerous family members and friends. I don't wish this on anyone. But Sydney, what would you suggest that Ashley do in this situation?
Yeah, I think, having a conversation, speaking the language they understand, break it down for them, don't get frustrated when they don't get it right away. It's a long process. Again, going back, that internalized ableism, you're still learning and unpacking that, and, being mindful, being patient with them, and just, starting off with like, hey, calling when you see it, saying what you say instead, having the research to back it up, and just, your family and, your friends, and, be like, it's impacting me, it's hurting me, because, ideally they wouldn't want to hurt you, if they're your friends and family. And so really understanding that, just having that conversation and taking your time with it. And it's not going to take one day, it's going to take a long time.
Yes, absolutely. We do have another question in the chat that I want to address, but we'll do that in just a minute. So as we're out in the workplace and in the world, do you recommend that people like pipe up when they hear this? Should they already know how they're going to respond to these kinds of things before they take this on in a real life situation? What do you recommend people do to maybe prepare or to be better able to identify and spot these things when they happen?
Yeah, I think, trusting your gut first and foremost. You feel it when someone says something wrong that you're uncomfortable with. Have the research, have the learnings, have the term to use instead ready in place. And when I go into companies, I usually suggest to have an anonymous form where someone can submit any issue they have within the organization, and pertain to ableism, because sometimes people, they want to call it out, but they're scared. So having that resource to be able to say it anonymously, or having an email or Slack message, be like, hey, you said this in the meeting, or you said this in this email, can we talk about it? I would love to talk about it more with you.
I very much like that. My mom, the enduring advice I've gotten from her is to paint people into the nice corner. So like they say something completely out of pocket, and when your first reaction is to go, I'm sorry, what? Like she tells, the way she does it is to go, I know you didn't mean such and such. Could you explain what you meant by that? I'm sure you didn't mean blah, 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 blah. So that way, if they're going to like double down, they have to do it hard and it's going to be obvious. But you're also giving them an opportunity to backtrack or to explain what they actually meant, because maybe they honestly just misspoke. Like, this is also part of the thing where you do have to kind of gauge the people around you to figure out if it's worth it for you, if it's even psychologically safe to address this, or if it's, maybe some, and we always want to believe that people can change and people can grow, but sometimes we know it's just not worth the effort, right? It might be a losing situation that you don't want to have any part of. And that's a hard decision to make.
Yeah. And like you said, it gets so ingrained in us, and so it takes a while to unlearn, and just being mindful. It's like, and also it's like, okay, what was your intent, and having a conversation, what was your intent when you said that? I'm sure you didn't mean, like your mom does, I'm sure you didn't mean anything by that, but once you have the conversation, you can unpack, oh, they intended to be ableist in that moment, or they just didn't know better.
Yeah, I like that. We got a question in the chat from Nocturne. This person wanted to know, do you remember any particular aha moments when it came to your self-advocacy that you would be comfortable sharing?
I think, well, because when I worked with the kids, teens, and adults with disabilities in the recreational setting, I was like, I'm advocating for them. I knew my lived experience. I was like, I'm advocating for them, I'm advocating for them. But my aha moment was when I realized I had to start advocating for myself. And even as like now as an external consultant, I'm like, I need these resources. I need these tools in place to be successful in this position. If you want me to help address your needs as my client, I'm just really realizing that if I want to continue doing this work, I have to advocate for myself first and foremost, for my, my accommodations I need, my support I need to be successful and to continue helping other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the first things that really surprised me when I first started being really open about the fact that, like, what my diagnoses were, I'm still in therapy. I like put on my calendar, like, hey, don't book me for this because I'm in therapy or I have a psychiatrist appointment. And it was literally like really, really low grade stuff, right? Like I wasn't coming out and saying this at the start of every meeting or whatever, but the amount of people that then reached out, either because they were curious about what I was going through and wanted to know how they could support it. There were even more people that asked questions about, like, just kind of general questions about therapy. How long have you been going? How did you find a therapist? That kind of stuff. That it really did open up that conversation with so many other people. And it wasn't just stuff around mental health or bipolar disorder that applied to me. A lot of it was people reaching out about something that they felt ashamed about, that they felt made them different, that they felt they couldn't talk about, at work. So truly, y'all, if you are in a position and resourced enough and safe enough to do these things, they can have far-reaching implications that you have at this point have no idea, really could not even dream of. Okay, a lot of these terms are coming up new to some of our people in our chat. So I've been trying to drop in, definitions or, spelling out acronyms and that kind of thing. Are there any resources that you recommend for people, for lists or like to get a baseline understanding of ableism and of, what these issues might entail?
I feel like there's not enough, frankly. I'm actually in the process of right now creating what is an ableism in the history of ableism course. So stay tuned for that. But I think, typing in, I know there's some books. I can't remember the books off the top of my head, but I know there's some books written about ableism and just, learning about what disability is and just getting more acquainted with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I very much appreciate, this idea of seeing ableism through the lens of an invisible illness or not illness, I'm sorry, invisible diversity. Because for so long, the conversation around DEIB was centered on visibility, right? It was centered on what are the optics of the situation. And so I very much appreciate that now we're starting to dive in deeper and people are realizing that, there are other groups that are also subject to the same, mistreatment and, lack of support. Okay. If people are more interested about, finding like guidelines for how to do this, you said that you've got some stuff coming out. Are there any resources that you have found particularly helpful as you like along your journey, like podcasts you listen to or, websites or newsletters you subscribe to? What can people do if they want to stay up to date in this area?
I think, following you guys, frankly, following Power to Fly is such a great tool in these works.
We did not tell her to say that, by the way, just so you're aware, like, love you, absolutely love you. Love the shout out, but promise this was not prompted. Okay, we only have about 5 minutes left. I want to talk some more about Accessible Creates. So why did you found it? What was it like when you founded it? Let's start from the ground.
Yeah, so I worked a summer job as an HR clerk, and I was very, again, hey, thank you for this position as an HR clerk, really getting my feet wet in HR. But, I was also asked to do a lot of accessibility things. In my interview, I was like, I'm passionate about accessibility and diversity, equity, inclusion. And they're like, oh, sweet. We have AOD policies and things we're all behind on that, we are interested in, but it's not what we're passionate about. We have lots of other things to do because there's only 3 HR members in the team. So you can imagine they have a lot of things to do. And so I did that. I did a workshop with them on how to support disability in the workplace. What does that look like? Because it was Disability Pride Month in July when I was there. And all these different aspects was like, I like presenting, I like doing presentations, I like talking about accessibility and neurodiversity in the workplace. And I started, it's going to be 2 years next Thursday since I started Accessible Creates. And when I first started, I was like, okay, it was mostly focusing on speaking and, doing speaking events and doing some training, but it's like, okay, people also need a consulting piece. So I kind of, also made sure that, consulting was an aspect, and really working with companies to really look at their accommodation statements, if they even have an accommodation statement, looking at their job descriptions, looking at the policies and procedures, going in and doing trainings on supporting neurodiversity or disability in the workplace, speaking at events, and, just all around the things I'm really passionate about doing, and bringing awareness to, and also talking about the intersectionality of how accessibility and disability, and how someone brings a whole self to work. Because when I first started, people would talk about physical disabilities, which is great, but they weren't really talking about neurodiversity yet and what that looked like. And so just all these different pieces. And so now I'm actually doing a project with the federal government of Canada, which I'm very happy to say. And, working with them to make sure that the hiring process is more accessible and inclusive to people with disabilities.
Oh, I mean, I have nothing that I can say that can top anything that what she's saying right now. Y'all truly, absolutely loving this. I'm also loving the conversation that we're having on the chat over here. There's a bunch of people talking about how, they're unsure about the terminology, superpowers, special skills. And this is something that's really personal for each of us, right? Like there is no standard. There's no this is what they all want. Like, that's not how this works. So I do think that it is important that, as the person who is going through this or is living with whatever the condition, disability, disorder, symptoms, whatever it is, this is something you kind of have to decide for yourself. And, your feelings about it might change. That's okay. Let's see here. We've had a lot of people, let's see, we're talking about, there are a bunch of people talking about reframing and talking about the multiple types of PTSD, because that can be, something that people aren't really, around, like really up to the minute around. One of the things I did want to talk about, because we did have a question, is could you break the term intersectionality down for us in case anybody's unaware of that?
Yeah, so intersectionality in my understanding, my basic definition that I usually give is that how the world perceives us and how we perceive the world in all our different facets. We have, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your hobbies, your education, your career, all these different things that make up who you are. And, when people seeing these things, they think you're a certain way, but it's also how you choose to understand how your place in the world and how you want to show up.
Excellent. All right. In the last couple minutes we have, I want to ask you a somewhat off the cuff question. What question are we not asking? What's the question that people never ask you, or the thing that you never get to talk about, but we really should be talking about? Is it, and it could be literally anything around this topic.
I think the thing I've never asked is, how does it impact the day-to-day? How does it really impact how someone shows up? It's like, oh, well, I didn't mean it, or, and things like that. But it's like, how does ableism, both internal and external ableism, really impact how we show up in the world?
No, I think that's a really good one, because, like the way that something presents from one person might be incredibly different from anybody else that your, supervisor or whatever has any knowledge of or awareness. So I love that. I think that's very important. Okay, last thing. If people leave today's discussion and they only remember one thing, what do you want that one thing to be?
I want them to know that in the workplace, or even with amongst friends or family or anyone, when you hear something and you're like, okay, that's not racist, that's not sexist, but you feel in your gut, it's probably ableism.
Okay, I like that. I like that a lot. All right, where can people follow up with you? Where can they support Accessible Creates? What are we looking at there?
I just got a tickle in my throat.
All right, you're good.
Well, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, where can people follow you? Stay up to date on Accessible Creates. How can they support? What should people know going forward?
Yeah, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's just Sydney Elaine Butler, and just continue bringing these conversations back to your workplace, starting these conversations, and it's not going to take a day, like with anything. It's not going to take a week. It's not going to take a year. It's a lifelong committed process.
Yes, 110%. It really is. Okay, Sydney, this has been absolutely wonderful. I'm so happy we were able to talk with you today. Thank you so much for your time, as well as all the prep work that goes into this behind the scenes. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Hunter, I know we've got a couple extra minutes for you, so I'm going to turn the stage over to you.